A bit rustic for a palate like mine, don't you think? My father's voice cut through the murmur of his own birthday party. The crystal glasses of the food critics and wealthy friends seemed to chime in agreement. The word rustic hung in the air, a poisoned dart aimed right at my heart. It was my mother's gumbo, her legacy simmering in the heavy pot I'd carried across town as my gift to him. He pushed the small tasting bowl away, a dismissive flick of his wrist. "Take it to the kitchen," he said to the waiter, not even looking at me. "The staff might enjoy it." And just like that, in front of everyone, he reminded me of my place. Not at the table with the family legacy, but somewhere in the back with the scraps. My name is Clara, and I'm 32 years old. For most of my life, I've been trying to earn a place at a table I was born at. My father, Julian, is a legend in the New Orleans culinary world, or at least he was. His restaurant, The Legacy, was once the crown jewel of Creole cuisine, a place where presidents and celebrities dined. But legends fade, and for the past 2 years, I've been the one secretly keeping his from crumbling into dust. It started with a phone call, not a plea for help, but a declaration of duty. "Clara," he'd said, his voice heavy with the manufactured weight of a patriarch, "the legacy needs you. Your brother is doing his best, but the numbers aren't what they used to be." He knew which buttons to push. Legacy, family. My mother's memory, which he claimed, was soaked into the very cypress walls of that restaurant. He called it the Restaurant Rescue Fund. It sounded so official, so noble. It was a lie. It was my inheritance paid out in monthly installments before he was even gone. $2,500 every single month. I run a small breakfast and lunch spot in the Garden District. It's called Clara's Kitchen. It's humble, it's honest, and it pays my bills, but just barely. That $2,500 isn't spare change. It's the new oven I've been putting off buying for a year. It's the health insurance I worry about every time I feel a cold coming on. It's the dream of one day expanding my own place, a dream that gets pushed back another 30 days every single time I hit send on that transfer. My older brother Ethan is supposed to be managing the legacy, but Ethan manages his social life better than he manages a payroll. He drives a new car every 2 years. His Instagram is a highlight reel of expensive dinners at other better restaurants and weekend trips to the coast. He wears designer clothes that cost more than my monthly food budget. He never asks where the money comes from. He doesn't have to. He knows it comes from me. The irony is, I can cook. I learned at my mother's knee, watching her perfect the very recipes my father now serves to tourists at inflated prices. My gumbo, the one he dismissed, isn't just rustic. It's hers. It's the real legacy. But he never saw it. He never saw me. To him, I was the quiet one, the artistic one, the one who didn't have the stomach for the cutthroat world of fine dining. He encouraged me to open my little diner. "It's a nice hobby," he'd said, patting my hand. A hobby that was now funding his failing empire. For a long time, I told myself I was doing it for Mom's memory. I was keeping her dream alive, even if my father was the face of it. But if I'm being honest with myself, sitting in the quiet of my own kitchen after a 14-hour day, I know I was buying something. A ticket to the family table. A chance that one day my father would look at me with the same pride he reserves for Ethan. A hope that he would finally acknowledge my sacrifice. Did he ever thank me? Rarely. The money would arrive in the restaurant's account, and maybe a week later I'd get a short perfunctory text. Got it. As if I'd just returned a borrowed book. My contribution wasn't a gift. It was an expectation, a tax for being the less favored child. I paid it without complaint, because complaining meant causing a scene, and in my family scenes were my father's domain. The public humiliation at his birthday party wasn't new. It was just louder, more public. The casual cruelty I'd grown used to in private was now on display for the whole world to see. I went to work the next day and the day after, my hands smelling of onions and rue, my back aching. I kept my head down. I kept working. I kept telling myself it was fine. But something was different this time. Maybe it was the public nature of the dismissal. Maybe it was seeing the pity in the eyes of his friends. Or maybe after years of simmering the pot, was finally about to boil over. It came on a Tuesday night a week after the party. I was sitting in my small apartment above the diner, exhausted trying to reconcile the month's finances. My phone buzzed. It was my Uncle David, my father's younger brother. He'd always been the kindest of the bunch, the one who'd slip me a $20 bill on my birthday when my parents forgot. The text was simple. "Hey kiddo, found this on my phone from Julian's party. Thought you'd want to see it." Attached was a short video file. I smiled, thinking it might be a nice moment I'd missed, maybe the cake cutting or a toast. I pressed play. The video was shaky, clearly filmed from a seat at the main table. My father was holding court, a glass of bourbon in his hand. My brother Ethan was beside him laughing. Aunt Susan was there too. I could hear my Uncle David's voice from behind the camera. "You raised a good daughter," Julian David was saying. "Clara's really stepping up for the legacy. That fund was a great idea." My father snorted a sound of pure derision. "Good. She's useful. She owes us. After all the years we put a roof over her head, it's the least she can do." The camera wobbled. Ethan leaned in, a smirk on his face. "She's just desperate for approval. Always has been. It's kind of sad, honestly. Thinks if she throws enough money at Dad, he'll finally think she's as good as me." Then my Aunt Susan's voice, sharp and laced with amusement. "Well, at least she's good for something. She's the ATM that can cook." The table erupted in laughter. Not quiet chuckles. Loud, unrestrained laughter. The sound of people sharing a joke they all found hilarious. The sound of my own family laughing at my expense, at my sacrifice. The video ended. I sat there in the silence of my apartment, the sound of that laughter echoing in my ears. My hands were shaking. The walls felt like they were closing in. It wasn't just the words. It was the casualness, the ease with which they dismissed me. I wasn't a daughter, a sister, a niece. I was a transaction, a punchline, a utility. For a moment I couldn't breathe. I thought about the $2,500 that would leave my account in a few days. I thought about the new stove, the health insurance, the dream of my own, and I felt this overwhelming wave of nothing, a hollow, empty space where hope used to be. Why didn't I just walk away years ago? That's the question people always ask. Why did you stay? Why did you keep trying? For a long time, I didn't have the answer. But now, sitting in that suffocating silence, I understood. It's because when you grow up in a prison that doesn't have bars, you don't know you're locked in. My family's cruelty was never a constant storm. It was more like a series of small, calculated droughts, punctuated by just enough rain to keep me from dying of thirst. A rare compliment from my father. A shared memory with my brother. A Christmas where, for a few hours, we almost felt like a normal family. Those moments were the invisible chains. They were the glimmers of hope that kept me believing that if I just tried a little harder, sacrificed a little more, gave a little more freely one day, they would see me. One day they would love me the way I loved them. That financial support wasn't a gift. It was my rent. It was the price I paid to be allowed to exist in their orbit, to have a claim to the title of family, even if I was always seated at the far end of the table. It was the survival mechanism of a child who learned early on that her worth wasn't inherent. It had to be earned over and over again. But watching that video, hearing that laughter, I realized the truth. The chains weren't real. They were made of my own hope. And the door to the prison, it had been unlocked this whole time. I had been holding the key in my hand, too afraid to turn it. I watched the video again, and a third time. The hurt was still there, a deep primal ache. But now something else was stirring underneath it. A cold, quiet clarity. The kind that only comes when you finally see things exactly as they are, not as you wish them to be. I looked at the date on my phone. The next payment was due in 5 days. And for the first time in 4 years, I knew without a doubt that it wasn't going to be sent. The days leading up to the first of the month were a special kind of hell, a quiet, internal countdown that no one else knew I was keeping. Usually I'd feel a knot of resentment tighten in my stomach as I prepared to send a third of my savings to a man who wouldn't even remember to call me on my birthday. But this time, it was different. The knot was still there, but it wasn't resentment. It was anticipation. A cold, coiled spring of it. The video my uncle sent had changed the chemistry of my blood. I watched it every night before I went to bed, a ritual of self-inflicted pain that was slowly burning away the fog of hope I'd been living in for years. The laughter. That was the worst part. The casual, easy laughter as they dismantled my worth. The first of the month arrived. My phone buzzed with a calendar reminder at 8 a.m. Send money to the legacy. I swiped it away. I went to my diner, prepped the kitchen, brewed the coffee, and opened for the breakfast rush. I moved through the motions of my day, my hands chopping, stirring, plating. But my mind was 1,000 miles away in a quiet, still room, waiting for the inevitable. It came at 2:30 in the afternoon, right after the lunch rush died down. My father's name flashed on the screen. He never called unless he needed something. Today I knew exactly what he needed. I let it ring twice, took a deep breath, and walked into the back office, closing the door behind me. I answered. Clara, his voice was impatient, already annoyed. I was just about to call Ethan. Is the transfer done? It hasn't shown up in the account. I stood there leaning against my desk, and I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. The fear I thought I would feel wasn't there. It had been replaced by something harder, something colder. I'm calling about the fund. I said, my voice steady even. It's not coming this month. There was a pause on the other end. Not shock, not yet. Just confusion. The kind of confusion you feel when an appliance that has always worked suddenly doesn't. What do you mean it's not coming? He asked. Is your bank having a problem? No, Dad, I said, and the word Dad felt foreign in my mouth. There's no problem with the bank. I'm not sending the money. This time, the silence was different. I could hear the gears turning in his head, processing my defiance. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. The annoyance was gone, replaced by a low, dangerous growl. This isn't a choice, Clara. This is your responsibility. The legacy depends on it. Your mother's legacy depends on it. There it was. The weapon he always used, my mother. The ghost he paraded out whenever he needed to manipulate me. But the ghost had no power over me anymore. My mother's legacy was her food. I said, my voice still quiet, but with an edge he'd never heard before. Her kindness, her recipes. It wasn't about funding Ethan's expensive dinners or your bar tab. The line went completely silent. I knew I'd hit a nerve. He didn't know I knew. He didn't know I'd seen the video. You have no idea what you're doing, he finally spat, the pretense of a concerned father gone. You're being selfish. After everything this family has done for you, What has this family done for me? I interrupted. Besides, take my money and laugh about it behind my back. A sharp intake of breath. He knew I'd seen it. Your Uncle David is a fool, he hissed. That was just talk. Family joking around. You're being too sensitive. Was it a joke when you called me your ATM? I asked. Was it a joke when Ethan said I was just desperate for your approval? Was it a joke when Aunt Susan said at least I was good for something? He didn't have an answer. He just sputtered his rage building. You think you can just cut me off? After all I've done for you, I'll make sure everyone in this city knows what an ungrateful, worthless daughter you are. I almost smiled. Worthless. The same word he used in the video. The word he thought would break me. But I was already broken, and in the breaking I'd found something else. Strength. Go ahead, Dad, I said softly. Tell them. Tell everyone what happens when your ATM runs out of cash. I hung up before he could respond. My hand was shaking as I set the phone down on the desk. My heart was pounding a frantic drum against my ribs, but I wasn't crying. The old Clara would have crumbled. She would have apologized, sent the money, and then spent the night hating herself. But the old Clara died on a Tuesday night, watching a video on a cracked phone screen. My phone started ringing again immediately. My father. I declined the call. It rang again. Declined. A text came through. You will regret this. I read the words and felt a shiver of fear, but it was quickly replaced by a wave of pure, unadulterated freedom. I had finally done it. I had cut the cord. I didn't know what he would do. I didn't know what came next. All I knew was that I was no longer paying for a seat at a table where I was the main course. The storm was coming. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't running for cover. I was the storm. My father's threat. You will regret this echoed in the silence of my apartment for the rest of the day. It wasn't a loud, explosive threat. It was a promise delivered with the cold certainty of a man who was used to getting his way, a man who viewed any challenge to his authority not as a disagreement, but as a declaration of war. The initial rush of adrenaline from our phone call faded, leaving a knot of dread in its place. What was he going to do? Slander me to the rest of the family? Show up at my diner and cause a scene? For years I had navigated my life by avoiding his wrath, by making myself small and agreeable. Now I had stood in the path of the storm, and I had no idea how destructive it would be. Fear is a powerful motivator, but so is anger. And as I sat in my office that night, staring at the growing pile of unpaid invoices for my own business, a different feeling began to take root. He thought he could scare me back into line. He thought I would crumble, just like I always had. But his threat had an unintended effect. It didn't make me want to hide. It made me want to fight. And to fight, I needed to understand what I was up against. I didn't start with lawyers or bank statements. I started with memory, my mother's memory. Who in that city had loved her? Who had respected her, not just as the wife of a famous chef, but as a person? Who would be loyal to her, not to him? The name came to me instantly. Mr. Boudreau. He ran a small seafood supply company down by the French market. He was a gruff, weathered man who smelled of salt water and shrimp, and he had adored my mother. She was the only one who could make him laugh. He used to save the best oysters for her delivering them to the back door of the legacy himself. My hands trembled as I dialed his number. He answered on the second ring, his voice a low grumble. Boudreau's. Mr. Boudreau, it's Clara, Julian's daughter. There was a pause. Then his voice softened. Clara, child, good to hear from you. How are you doing? I haven't seen you in ages. I'm okay, I lied. I was just calling to check in. to see how you were." "Same as always," he grumbled, tired. "The shrimping gets harder every year. How's your father, I heard?" "The legacy has been having a tough go of it." My heart sped up. "That's actually why I was calling. I've been trying to help out, but things are complicated." "Did he talk to you about it?" Mr. Boudreau was quiet for a long moment. I could hear the sounds of his shop and the background ice being shoveled, men shouting. "Your father is a proud man," he finally said, his voice careful. "He came to see me about 6 months ago. Said things were tight. Said he was trying to protect your mother's legacy. He asked if I could help him out on the pricing for a while." "Help him out? How?" "He asked for a 50% discount. Said it was temporary, just until they got back on their feet. For your mother's sake," he said. 50%. He was essentially asking for free product. "And you did it," I whispered. "Of course I did," Mr. Boudreau said, his voice rough with emotion. "Your mother was the finest woman I ever knew. If helping Julian kept her memory alive, it was the least I could do. But Clara, he never went back to paying full price. And I haven't had the heart to ask." After I hung up, I stared at the wall. My father hadn't just been taking my $2,500 a month. He'd been leveraging my mother's name, her memory, to squeeze favors and discounts from people who had loved her. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about him desecrating her legacy for his own survival. That one phone call opened the floodgates. I spent the next 2 days in a fever of quiet investigation. I called the old bakery that had supplied the legacy with bread for 30 years. The owner's wife told me a similar story. Julian had come to them full of sorrow, talking about how hard it was to keep things going. They'd extended him a line of credit that now totaled over $10,000 with no payments in sight. I called the produce supplier, the farmer who provided their Creole tomatoes, a local artist whose paintings hung on the restaurant walls. Each story was a variation on the same theme. Julian, the grieving widower and legendary chef, struggling to keep his wife's dream alive. Everyone had wanted to help. Everyone had been manipulated. The Restaurant Rescue Fund wasn't just my secret burden. It was a citywide campaign of emotional fraud. He was using the goodwill my mother had built over a lifetime as his personal line of credit. By Wednesday evening, I had a notebook filled with names, dates, and whispered confessions. The picture was clear and horrifying. This wasn't a man struggling to save his business. This was a con artist using grief as his currency. My fear of him was gone, utterly and completely gone. You can't be afraid of a man you no longer respect. All that was left was a cold, hard rage. He had threatened me. He thought he was the one with the power. He had no idea that the real power was the truth, and I was just beginning to uncover it. The notebook was my shield and my weapon. It was filled with the jagged, angry scribbles of a woman waking up from a long, drugged sleep. Every name, every date, every whispered story of my father's deception was a dose of smelling salts, sharpening my senses, clearing my head. The stories from the baker, the farmer, the artist, they were powerful, but they were just that, stories, hearsay. I had no proof, nothing concrete to stand on. If my father decided to follow through on his threat to ruin me, I needed something undeniable, something written in ink. There was only one person who might have that, Mr. Boudreau. His voice, rough with a sympathy he couldn't quite hide, had stayed with me. He was caught in the same web. I was tethered by a misguided loyalty to my mother's memory. Part of me was terrified to ask him to betray that loyalty, but another colder part of me knew I had to. I walked into his shop on a Thursday morning. The air was thick with the smell of brine and diesel. a scent I'd always found comforting. He was behind the counter weighing a bag of crawfish for a customer. When he saw me, his expression softened. Clara, back again so soon. I waited until the customer left. I need to talk to you, Mr. Boudreau, about my father. He wiped his hands on his apron and sighed a deep, weary sound. I figured you might. Let's go in the back. His office was a cramped, cluttered space filled with stacks of invoices and tide charts. He closed the door and gestured for me to sit. I shouldn't have told you what I did, he began. It wasn't my place. It was, I said firmly. And I think there's more. More than just a discount you can't afford. You know something else, don't you? He looked down at his hands calloused from years of hauling nets. Your father and I, we go back a long way. Before he was famous. Before he even met your mother. I've seen him at his best, and Lord knows I've seen him at his worst. This is his worst, isn't it? He finally met my eyes, and what I saw there confirmed everything. He came to me about 2 years ago, he said, his voice low. It wasn't just about a discount. He said he was starting a private fund, a legacy fund, he called it. Said he was collecting donations from his oldest friends and suppliers to get the restaurant through a rough patch. Asked for $5,000, a one-time donation. And you gave it to him. He said it was to honor your mother. How could I say no, he whispered. But then I heard he'd asked the same of LeBlanc, the baker, and old man Thibodeau, the farmer. We all gave. We all thought we were the only ones he'd asked. My blood ran cold. This was bigger than I thought. Where did the money go? Mr. Boudreau stood up and walked to an old metal filing cabinet. He pulled out a worn, leather-bound ledger. It looked ancient. Julian and I, we used to do business on a handshake. But after a while I started keeping my own records, just in case. He opened the book. The pages were filled with his neat, blocky handwriting. This is what he told me he needed for the restaurant. Payroll supplies, repairs. He pointed to a column of figures. And this, he turned the page, is where I saw the money actually going. It was a separate set of entries. Scrawled notes, photocopies of receipts he'd somehow gotten his hands on. It wasn't payroll. It wasn't supplies. It was a $10,000 payment to a European travel agency, a receipt for a $4,000 Patek Philippe watch, weekly payments to a high-end liquor distributor that went far beyond what any restaurant, even a failing one, would need for its bar stock. The numbers swam before my eyes. He wasn't trying to save the restaurant. He was funding his retirement. He was using my mother's memory, my own hard-earned money, and the generosity of his oldest friends to pay for vacations and luxury watches while his business rotted from the inside out. He was stealing from all of you, I breathed, tracing a finger over a receipt for a custom-tailored suit. He calls it borrowing, Mr. Boudreau said grimly, but I don't see him in any hurry to pay it back. I confronted him once, about 3 months ago. He laughed in my face, told me the restaurant business was tough, and that a man of his stature had appearances to maintain. He said the money was an investment in the brand. I felt a wave of nausea, the sheer, breathtaking arrogance of it. Why are you showing me this? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He looked at me, and his eyes were full of a deep, ancient sadness. Because you have your mother's eyes, he said, and she would have never stood for this. She believed in honest work. She believed in treating people right. What he's doing, it's a stain on her name, and I can't be a part of it anymore. He closed the ledger. Take pictures of these pages, child. Take all the proof you need. A man who threatens his own daughter, a man who steals from his friends in the name of his dead wife. He deserves whatever's coming to him. I pulled out my phone and with shaking hands I photographed every single page, every damning entry, every fraudulent receipt. The evidence was irrefutable. My father wasn't just a bad parent. He wasn't just a narcissist. He was a con artist. A thief hiding in plain sight, draped in the cloak of a culinary legend. When I walked out of Mr. Boudreau's shop and back into the bright New Orleans sun, the world looked different, sharper, colder. The dread was gone, replaced by a singular, chilling purpose. He had threatened me. He thought I was a sensitive girl who would crumble under pressure. He had no idea I had just been handed a book of matches and a map to every bridge he'd ever built, and I was going to burn them all to the ground. I held the photos on my phone like a rosary of sins. Each image a page from Mr. Boudreau's ledger, a forged invoice, a receipt for a watch that cost more than my car, was a prayer for the reckoning to come. For 2 days, I did nothing. I went to work. I smiled at my customers. I served them coffee and beignets. On the surface, I was the same Clara, but underneath, a tectonic shift had occurred. The ground beneath my entire life had fractured, and I was just waiting for the world to notice the chasm. It started as things often do in New Orleans, with a whisper. A food blogger, someone with a small but loyal following, wrote a post titled, "Is the Sun Setting on a Creole Legacy?" It was vague. It mentioned rumors of financial trouble, of suppliers growing impatient. It didn't name names, but it didn't have to. Anyone in the city's tight-knit food scene knew she was talking about my father. A friend sent me the link. I read it standing in my kitchen, the morning sun streaming through the window, and I felt a cold sense of inevitability. The truth had a way of seeping out like water through a faulty levee. The whispers grew louder. I heard from a waitress at another restaurant that my brother Ethan had gotten into a shouting match with a wine distributor over an unpaid bill. A chef I knew mentioned that my father had been seen at the casino looking stressed. The narrative was building a story of decline and desperation that my father and brother were no longer in control of. Their reaction wasn't shame. It was fury. My Uncle David called me, his voice fraught with a panicky loyalty I couldn't understand. "Clara, your father is beside himself. He says people are spreading vicious lies. He thinks you're behind it." I haven't said a word to anyone I said, which was technically true. "Well, you need to fix it," he pleaded. "Ethan is trying to manage the damage, but this is a nightmare for the family's reputation." Manage the damage. That's what they called it. Not fix the problems or pay back the people we stole from. Just manage the damage. And then I saw how Ethan planned to manage it. An Instagram post from Nola Bites, the city's most influential food podcast, appeared in my feed. The host, a sharp-witted journalist named Marcus, was known for his tough but fair interviews. He could make or break a restaurant with a single episode. The post was a picture of Ethan smiling his charming, practiced smile. The caption read, "This week, the story behind the rumors." Ethan, heir to the culinary throne of the legacy, sits down with us to set the record straight. He's promising a no-holds-barred conversation about the future of his family's restaurant. You won't want to miss this. I stared at the post, my blood turning to ice. My brother, the Prince of Appearances, was walking into the lion's den. He actually believed he could talk his way out of this. He believed his charm was a currency that could pay off years of lies and theft. He thought this was his stage, his chance to play the victim, the noble son fighting to save his father's dream from a harsh market and cruel, unfounded rumors. He had no idea he was the main attraction in a public execution. My first instinct was to do nothing, to let him walk into that studio and hang himself with his own smooth, practiced lies. Let Marcus tear him apart. It would be justice. But then I thought about Mr. Boudreau. I thought about the baker, the farmer, the people who had given my father money out of love for my mother. Ethan wouldn't be just lying for himself. He'd be lying on their backs. He'd dismiss their generosity as a business arrangement, their trust as a simple misunderstanding. I couldn't let that happen. They deserved to have the truth represented, even if it was just in the questions he was asked. That night I sat at my laptop and created a new anonymous email address. My hands were steady. My mind was clear. I typed a short, simple message to the public contact address for the NOLA Bites podcast. Subject: Questions for Ethan. The email read, "To Marcus. If you're speaking with Ethan about the financial state of the legacy, you might want to dig deeper than just a tough market. You could ask him about the Restaurant Rescue Fund and what percentage of it went to his father's tailor versus the restaurant's payroll. You could ask him why Boudreaux's Seafood has been giving them a 50% discount for 2 years. You could ask him about the $10,000 European vacation his father took last fall, paid for by donations from local suppliers. And finally, you might just ask him where his father got the money for that brand new Patek Philippe watch he was showing off at his birthday party. Just a few questions from a concerned member of the New Orleans food community. I read it over once. It wasn't an accusation. It was a roadmap, a series of doors just waiting for a journalist to turn the knob. I hit send. The trap wasn't mine. It was theirs. They had built it piece by piece with every lie, every stolen dollar, every act of breathtaking arrogance. I just drew them a map to the trigger. And I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my bones that my brother was going to walk right into it. The podcast went live at 7 p.m. on a Friday. I was in my diner long after the last customer had gone home. The chairs were stacked on the tables, the floors were mopped, and the only light came from the glow of my laptop screen on the stainless steel counter. It smelled of bleach and old coffee. My whole world had been reduced to this small sterile room and the tinny sound coming from my computer's speakers. Marcus, the host of NOLA Bites, had a voice like smooth bourbon, warm, inviting, but with a sharp kick you didn't see coming. He was a journalist, a real one, who had dismantled the reputations of more than a few arrogant chefs who thought they were untouchable. And then there was my brother. Ethan's voice was different. It was practiced. It was the voice of a man who had spent his entire life charming his way out of trouble. He was good. I had to give him that. For the first 15 minutes, he was masterful. He painted a picture of a legacy under siege. He spoke of my father, the aging lion, a titan of Creole cuisine, struggling against a tide of changing tastes and a difficult economy. He talked about streamlining operations and making tough choices. He was eloquent. He was sympathetic. He was a damn good liar. Listening to him, I almost felt a flicker of pity. He was a boy playing a man's game armed with nothing but a thesaurus of corporate buzzwords and a lifetime of unearned confidence. Almost. So the rumors of financial trouble, Marcus said, his voice casual, they're exaggerated. Completely, Ethan said with a smooth laugh. Every restaurant in this city has its ups and downs. We're in a downswing, but we're resilient. The legacy isn't going anywhere. My father built something to last. The air in my diner suddenly felt thin. I leaned closer to the laptop, my heart starting to pound. This was it, the pivot. That's interesting, Marcus said, and I could hear the trap being set. Because we received an interesting email from a listener, a concerned member of the food community. They suggested a few lines of questioning. I heard Ethan's breath catch a tiny, almost imperceptible sound. Oh, he said, his voice a little too bright. Always happy to engage with our fans. This listener mentioned something called the Restaurant Rescue Fund. Marcus continued, his tone still conversational. They seemed to believe that a significant portion of the restaurant's operating costs were being covered by private donations. There was a beat of silence. "That's a private family matter," Ethan said, his voice tight. "My sister Clara has been incredibly supportive. We're a family that helps each other." "I see," Marcus said, "because this listener also mentioned that your suppliers have been supportive, extraordinarily supportive. Mr. Boudreau, at Boudreau's Seafood, for example. Has he been offering a discount?" "We have long-standing relationships with our suppliers," Ethan deflected. "They understand the value of the legacy to this community." "So it's not true that he's been giving you a 50% discount for 2 years out of respect for your late mother?" Another pause, longer this time. "We have arrangements." Ethan finally stammered. "It's complicated." "I bet it is," Marcus said, and now the warmth was gone from his voice. It was pure, sharp steel. "Just as complicated as the $10,000 European vacation your father took last fall. Was that paid for by these arrangements as well?" "My father deserved a vacation." Ethan snapped his composure, finally cracking. "He's been working his whole life." "I'm sure he has," Marcus said, his voice dangerously quiet. But this listener's final question was the one that interested me most. "They mentioned your father's birthday party, the one where he was showing off a brand new Patek Philippe watch. For our listeners who don't know, that's a timepiece that can cost upwards of $50,000. An impressive purchase for a man whose business is in a downswing." The silence was a chasm. I could picture my brother in that sterile podcast studio, the microphone, a witness to his unraveling. He was trapped. He was cornered. And like any cornered animal, he lashed out. "This is an attack," he said, his voice rising, cracking with a mixture of rage and panic. "This is a hit job. My father is a legend. He built this city's culinary reputation. He has given everything to the legacy." "Everything?" "So the watch was a business expense." Marcus pressed relentless. "The watch, the vacation, the money from Clara, the money from Mr. Boudreau? It doesn't matter." Ethan's voice was almost a shout now. "Don't you understand? When you're a brand, when you're a legacy, you have to maintain a certain image. My father has earned the right to that, after everything he's given, everything he's sacrificed. We deserved it. We deserve to be supported. We deserve to protect the name he built." He said it. He actually said it. We deserved it. The words hung in the air, a confession of entitlement so pure, so breathtakingly arrogant, that it sucked all the oxygen out of the room. I stopped breathing. I could hear the frantic pounding of my own heart in the sudden dead silence of the podcast. Marcus didn't say a word. He didn't have to. He just let Ethan's words echo, letting the world hear not just a lie, but the rotten, entitled philosophy behind it. I slowly reached out and hit the record button on my laptop's screen capture software. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew the world had just heard the truth. Not my version. Not a rumor from an anonymous email. They'd heard it from the heir himself. The sound of an empire crumbling under the weight of its own arrogance. And it was glorious. By Saturday morning, the clip was everywhere. It was a digital wildfire spreading through the text messages of line cooks, the private Facebook groups of sommeliers, and the group chats of every food critic in the city. The 30-second clip of my brother's confession, his arrogant, panicked declaration that we deserved, it became the city's worst-kept secret. It wasn't my accusation anymore. It was his admission. I didn't have to do anything else. The community did the work for me. The whispers my father had been so worried about became a roar. On Monday, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. Is this Clara? The voice was low, formal, and carried an authority that made me stand up a little straighter. This is Jean-Luc Dubois from the New Orleans Culinary Association. The association. They were the gatekeepers, the keepers of legacy, the bestowers of stars, the arbiters of honor in our world. To be recognized by them was everything. To be condemned by them was a fate worse than a bad review. We are opening a formal inquiry into the conduct of your father, Julian, he said, his voice, void of emotion, based on a recording that has been widely circulated. We have also heard from several suppliers regarding financial irregularities. We were told you might have information that could provide clarity. This was the moment, the point of no return. I could have said no. I could have said it was a family matter. The old Clara would have. She would have protected him even now, but the old Clara was gone. I do, I said, my voice as cold and clear as ice water. Where should I send it? I emailed him the photographs from Mr. Boudreau's ledger. Every single one. I wasn't just giving them evidence. I was signing the death warrant for my father's career. The association's verdict came 2 days later. It wasn't a quiet phone call. It was a press release sent to every major news outlet and food blog in the state. It was a public execution. They announced that effective, immediately Julian was stripped of his Lifetime Achievement Award. His name was being removed from their Hall of Honor. The press release used words like a pattern of unethical financial conduct and behavior that fundamentally violates the integrity of our community. It didn't just censure him, it erased him. The door to the world he had built, the world that had defined him, was slammed, locked, and bolted shut. My Uncle David called me that night, his voice hollow. He's not speaking, Clara. He's just sitting in his study, staring at the wall. Your mother says he hasn't moved in hours. I learned something profound in watching him fall. There are two kinds of power in this world, the power you have and the power you are. The power you have is external. It's money, titles, reputation, the fear or admiration in other people's eyes. It's a suit of armor you rent. It can be bought, it can be borrowed, and as my father was discovering, it can be taken away. His entire life was built on the power he had, his awards, his name, the legend of the legacy. It was a magnificent performance, but it was hollow. The power you are is different. It's internal. It's your character, your integrity, your resilience, your kindness. It can't be bought or sold. It can be tested, it can be beaten down, but it can't be taken from you by a press release or a bad review. It's the foundation you're left with when the storm has passed and everything else has been washed away. For years, I thought I had nothing. I had a small diner, a small apartment, a small life. But I had a foundation. It was built on my mother's recipes, on honest work, on treating people with a kindness my father never understood. My father, on the other hand, had built his entire identity on a throne of smoke. When the association took away his titles, when the community took away his reputation, they weren't just taking away his accolades. They were taking away his very self. He had nothing left to stand on. There was no man underneath the legend, just the empty space where a conscience should have been. It was the ultimate illusion of power from an empty wallet. Not a wallet of money, but a wallet of character. He hadn't just been exposed. He had ceased to exist. The press release was the first tremor. The lawsuits were the earthquake. Mr. Boudreau was the first to file. He didn't do it quietly. He held a press conference on the steps of the courthouse, his face a grim mask of betrayal. I did business with Julian for 40 years, he said, his voice cracking with an old man's fury. I did it for his wife, a saint. He used her name to steal from me. This isn't about money. This is about honor." His words opened the floodgates. LeBlanc the baker filed suit the next day for the $20,000 he was owed. Thibodeau the farmer followed, demanding repayment for a decade of handshake deals that had gone unpaid. Within a week, the legacy was buried under an avalanche of legal paper, a monument to my father's greed. The restaurant closed its doors on a rainy Tuesday. There was no grand announcement, no final service, just a sign on the door, handwritten and taped to the glass, "Closed until further notice." By the weekend, the notice was gone, replaced by a formal bankruptcy declaration from the court. I drove past that evening. The lights were out. The brass sign bearing my mother's signature, the one my father had polished for photographers for 30 years, had been taken down. There was just a dark, empty space where the name used to be. The legacy was officially dead. Ethan's fall was faster and far more public. He was the face of the podcast disaster, the poster child for the family's arrogance. The bankruptcy court fired him immediately. He wasn't a manager, he was a liability. His friends, the ones who had clapped him on the back at expensive restaurants, suddenly stopped answering his calls. I heard from a cousin that his landlord had started eviction proceedings on his luxury apartment in the warehouse district. I saw him once a few weeks later. He was at a coffee shop trying to talk to a well-known restaurant investor, a man who used to dine at the Legacy twice a month. Ethan was in his charming mode, leaning in, smiling his easy smile. The investor listened for about 2 minutes, then stood up, shook his head, and walked away without a word, leaving my brother sitting there alone, his smile frozen on his face. The currency of his charm had been declared worthless. My father simply vanished. He retreated into the grand house he'd fought so hard to protect, a house that was no longer a symbol of his success, but a mausoleum of his failure. The invitations stopped coming. The phone stopped ringing. The food critics and society columnists who had once sung his praises now wrote about him in the past tense, a cautionary tale of hubris. The money problems were catastrophic. The lawsuits from the suppliers totaled over $150,000. The bankruptcy court was liquidating every asset the restaurant had, but it wasn't enough. Soon, the creditors started coming for their personal assets. The house, the cars, the art on the walls. Everything they had built, everything they had flaunted, was built on a foundation of my money and the stolen generosity of their friends. And when that foundation was pulled away, the entire structure collapsed. They were left with nothing but the rubble of their choices, buried in a mountain of debt and public shame. It wasn't revenge, it was gravity, and they had been in free fall for a very long time. While my father's legacy was being auctioned off piece by piece, the custom wine racks, the signed chef's jackets, the very tables where he had once held court, my mother's legacy was quietly coming to life. My little diner, Clara's Kitchen, exploded. The food blogger who had first written about the legacy's troubles came in for breakfast one morning curious. She tried the gumbo my father had called rustic. The gumbo he'd sent to the staff kitchen like a plate of scraps. She wrote a single sentence on her Instagram story. "I have found the soul of New Orleans, and it is in a bowl of gumbo at Clara's Kitchen." That was all it took. Suddenly there were lines out the door. People waited an hour for a seat at my tiny counter. Food critics, the same ones who had once fawned over my father, came in unannounced, scribbling notes in little black books. They wrote about the depth of the roux, the freshness of the seafood, the perfect balance of spice. They wrote about my mother. They called me the keeper of the flame, the true heir to the city's culinary soul. Every glowing review, every sold-out lunch service felt like a small, quiet The old Clara, the one who was used to being an afterthought, would have been suspicious. She would have assumed there was a catch, that this man wanted something she couldn't give. But I wasn't her anymore. I had spent the last month watching my father's world of smoke and mirrors collapse, and I was learning to trust the solid ground beneath my own feet. I didn't say yes right away. I took his card and I thought about it. I thought about what success really meant. The money was nice. The thought of it was a relief, a buffer against the world I hadn't had before, but it wasn't the point. This success, this line of customers, this sudden, dizzying attention, it wasn't built on my father's name. It was built on my mother's gumbo. It was her legacy finally seeing the light of day, resurrected not in a grand dying institution, but in a humble diner that smelled of honest work. I realized then that there are two kinds of justice in this world. There is the justice of the reaper. It's the justice of punishment, of balancing the scales by tearing the other side down. It's focused on the past, on making someone pay for what they did. My father was facing the justice of the reaper. He was losing his house, his name, his world. And while a part of me felt a cold satisfaction in that it was a hollow feeling, it didn't build anything. It just left an empty space where something bad used to be. But then there's the justice of the sower. It's not about tearing down. It's about building up. It's not about punishing the past. It's about planting a better future. It's the kind of justice that makes your enemy's actions small and irrelevant, not by destroying them, but by creating something so beautiful and good that their darkness has no place to live. It's the ultimate act of narrative warfare. You don't just win the battle. You rewrite the entire story. My father had spent his life hoarding a legacy. I was going to spend mine giving one away. That night, I made a decision. I met with the investor the next day and accepted his offer, but with one condition. A significant portion of the profits from every new location, from every bowl of gumbo sold under my mother's name, would go directly into a foundation. We would call it the Mother's Legacy Fund. It wouldn't just be a charity, it would be a promise. A scholarship fund for young women from the back streets of New Orleans, girls with talent and fire in their bellies who wanted to go to culinary school but couldn't afford it. It would be an initiative to document and preserve the old Creole recipes, the ones passed down from mothers to daughters in handwritten notebooks, the ones that get lost in the noise of celebrity chefs and flashy trends. My father had used my mother's memory as a weapon for his own gain. I was going to use it as a shield for others. He had created a legacy of debt and deceit. I was creating a legacy of opportunity and preservation. When I explained my vision to the investor, he didn't hesitate. He looked at me with a new respect. "That's not just a restaurant, Clara," he said. "That's a movement." For the first time since this all began, I felt a genuine, uncomplicated smile spread across my face. The sweet, slow simmer of my mother's gumbo was finally overpowering the bitter taste of my father's lies. And I had never felt more at peace. The kitchen is no longer a small, cramped space where I fight to make ends meet. It's big, it's bright. The air is thick with the smell of toasted flour and possibility. It's the smell of a good roux. It's the smell of a new beginning. Around the large stainless steel island, 10 young women stand their faces a mixture of concentration and awe. They are the first class of the Mother's Legacy Fund. A baker's daughter from the 9th Ward, a line cook from a tourist trap on Bourbon Street, a single mother who dreams of opening her own catering business. They are all here because they have fire in their bellies and talent in their hands, but the world hasn't given them a chance yet. I'm here to change that. Today, I'm teaching them my mother's gumbo. A good gumbo, I tell them, my voice echoing slightly in the high-ceilinged room, isn't about following a recipe. It's about respecting your foundation. The roux, that's your character. You can't rush it. You burn it. You have to start over. There are no shortcuts to integrity. I show them how to stir a slow, patient figure-8 motion, how to watch the color change from pale blonde to a deep, rich chocolate. As we work, I see a bit of myself in each of them. I see the quiet hope, the fear of failure, the desperate desire to create something beautiful and be seen for it. I think about my father sometimes. I hear he's living in a small apartment now somewhere on the North Shore. The house, the cars, the watches, all gone, liquidated to pay the people he wronged. I don't feel anger anymore when I think of him. I just feel a profound, bottomless pity for a man who had everything and ended up with nothing because he never understood the difference between price and value. Ethan sends me a text message once a year on my birthday. Just 2 words, "Happy birthday." I never reply. There's nothing left to say. The roux is perfect. Now for the trinity I announce, referring to the onions, celery, and bell peppers that form the flavor base of so much Creole cooking. I show them how to chop, how to listen for the sizzle when the vegetables hit the hot oil. This recipe, I say my voice a little softer. Now this was my mother's soul in a pot. It's the one thing she left me that was truly hers. My father, he thought it was simple. Rustic. He dismissed it. He told me it wasn't sophisticated enough for his restaurant, for his legacy. The young women look up at me, their knives still. They know my story. The whole city does. He was wrong, I continue. He spent his life chasing a legacy that was hollow. He built a brand on smoke and mirrors, and it vanished just as quickly. But this is real. This has substance. This recipe, this food, it fed me when I had nothing else. It gave me my start, and now it's going to give you yours. I let that sink in. I let them feel the weight of it, the power of taking something that was dismissed and turning it into the very foundation of your success. And maybe you're standing in a kitchen of your own right now. Maybe it's not a literal kitchen. Maybe it's an office, a studio, a classroom. Maybe you're the one who feels overlooked, the one whose contributions are taken for granted, the one whose gifts are called rustic by people who refuse to see their true worth. Here is what I want to tell you, from my kitchen to yours. Your legacy isn't something you inherit. It's something you build one honest ingredient at a time. It's not about the awards on the wall or the name on the door. It's in the work of your hands, the integrity of your roux, the character you refuse to burn for anyone. Don't wait for a seat at a table where you are not celebrated. Go out and build your own damn table. And when you do make it a long one, make it big enough for everyone else who has been told they're not enough. Fill it with the food of your soul, the creations that others dismissed, the very things that make you who you are. That is the best revenge. Not the bitter taste of their downfall, but the sweet, rich, nourishing flavor of your own success. That is the justice of the sower. That is the legacy that truly lasts. I look at the bright, hopeful faces around me. All right, I say, with a smile, picking up my spoon. Who wants to stir?